A dear friend of mine was named Ben R. Rich. He replaced Kelly Johnson at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And about 10 days before he died, I was speaking to Ben, but he told me, he said, Jim, we have things out in the desert that are 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. They have about 4,500 people at the Lockheed Skunk Works. What have they been doing for the last 20 some odd years?
So they had designed this program for the alumni engineers to come and hear Ben Rich speak. So I believe it was March 23rd, 1993. I could be off on the date, but I think it was March 23rd, 1993. We went to the Alumni Center. There were about 200 engineers there, a little cocktail reception, and then we sat down. I think we were right in the front row. And Ben did a beautiful slide presentation on his 40 years at the Skunk Works. It was all of the craft, starting with the U-2 and how he was the project engineer in charge of the SR-71, which actually promoted him or propelled him to end up taking over the CEO job from Kelly Johnson, who was the original president CEO of the Lockheed Skunk Works, all the way up to the F-117. And then, of course, this was 10 years before, because this was 93, the F-117 had been announced, I think, in 1983, and so there's a 10-year gap. And he made a few funny comments about the Aurora and things like that, but he intimated there was a lot of other stuff going on that he could not talk about. He ended his talk with a slide of a black disc zipping off into outer space. And he ended it with these words: "We now have the technology to take ET home." And the entire place broke up laughing. And Tom and I just looked at each other and said, did he really just say that? And are these people really not getting that what he's saying is real? And so we just kind of let it go. There was a polite Q&A session, and then the meeting ended. Well, about 20, 25 of us gathered up around him for a secondary, post Q&A like most speakers have. And it was very polite at first, people just asking questions about his career and different things like that. Finally, one lady said, how does this getting ET home work? And he looks at her and he says, well, talks a little bit lower. He was trying to ignore her kind of thing. So someone else asked the same question. So finally he said, let me ask you a question. Do you think it's possible to travel to the stars? He asked this of a particular engineer who had asked him a question about his career. And the engineer said, well, I don't know, it'd just take a long time to get there. He said, no, it wouldn't. We found an error in the equations, and we now know how to travel to the stars, and it won't take us a lifetime to do it. So, oh, that's pretty cool. So we started asking some more questions, right? And he just kind of dribbled out a little bit more information, a little bit more information, a little bit more information about this. He went on to describe a lot of different things about his career, about how this works. He didn't say what the equations were. I'm assuming they're Maxwell's equations. I did specifically ask that question. But when it all wound up, he turned around and said, I've got to go now. He started to walk out of the room. Now we're down to about 5 or 6 people at that point, because most people had dribbled away. I followed him through the room and I said, Mr. Rich. And he turned around and looked at me like, who are you? And I said, I have a real interest in propulsion you're talking about that gets us to the stars. I said, can you tell me how it works? And he looks at me like, who are you again? And he said, well, let me ask you a question. How does ESP work? And it just threw me back. I'm thinking, oh my God. I wasn't expecting a question. I was expecting him to just say something. And he said, I said, I don't know, all points in space and time are connected? He said, that's how it works. Turned around, walked away. Now, I don't know if he was saying that I got the right answer, or he was just saying, no, it's CSP, it's how it works. But I do think there's something to that. So 3 very important things. 1 is we have the technology to take ET home. 2 is there's an error in the equations. And this is important because if you realize that stealth is all built around a Russian mathematician's equations, and that's how they figured out how to do stealth. Now they've figured out through equations how to do greater than light travel. I've been corrected, faster than light travel. And then finally, that the way ESP works is the same way that this technology works.
All right, so John asks, all right, Steve, please comment on this. According to Ben Rich, CEO of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works in 1993, he said, we now have the technology to take ET home. The question that John asks is he nuts or what?
I'm going to say, I've seen this quote, and I've seen it just propagate like crazy, especially through the social media world and that kind of stuff. And I've heard it attributed to a number of things, to private conversations, but in speeches is where one of the common threads is. And as the historian for the Skunk Works, this was a question I had too. And I actually worked with Ben and sat in his office and talked with him about all kinds of subjects, including this. And he never said that to me, okay? But one of the really interesting things, Ben wrote down all of his speeches. They were all written out, including the listing of the slides out there. So what is in the social media world is that we say we have this ability to take ET home, and he shows a slide of a flying saucer up there. So I remember looking through Ben's speeches, and I remember this just as clearly as can be. And because the slide that's called out for this little paragraph is skunk in the clouds. So that was one of the slides we would put up as a thing of, hey, we're working on pretty cool stuff out there, wait a decade or two and you might see it. But it was to indicate that the skunk had a future out there, but we couldn't discuss it. So the skunk in the clouds was the identified slide. And I used it many times when I was giving speeches to civic groups or schools or whatever. But his actual words in the speech were, I'm going to try to remember this as clearly as I possibly can, was like, you may be wondering what we're working on in the Skunk Works now, and we can't talk about it, but I want you to know we've just been awarded a contract to build this, with the skunk in the clouds, to fly ET back home. Okay? That's what I have written down that he said.
Harry Reid, God bless his soul, made this disclosure a couple weeks after we met in the New Yorker, and you can look this up. I think it was like a May 2021 New Yorker story where he says, I knew for decades, and he made this disclosure, not me, so I'm going to say the name of the contractor. Harry Reid said this. We knew that Lockheed Martin had this material for decades. I tried to get access and I was denied. And specifically with the Lockheed Martin stuff, he was talking about during the OSAP program. And for the people who are on this program, I submitted this shit to DOPSR, got this cleared, so don't freak out, but I'm telling the truth here. So Lockheed Martin wanted to divest itself from this material at a specific facility that's known to me that I provided to the Inspector General. Like street address, all that shit, right? And the idea was if they made a security catcher's mitt for this shit, most serious SAP possible, the contractor and the other government customer, which was the Central Intelligence Agency, for that specific Lockheed material, and it was shit that they recovered from like the 50s and stuff, and it was like bits and pieces of like hull structure, shit like that, and so they were going to tech transfer it, and the $21 or $22 million was actually for Bigelow Aerospace to build out, facilities in Las Vegas and material analysis equipment. And I saw the staff meeting slides, I saw the paperwork. Like there's a paperwork trail I've seen on this shit, and I talked to the people involved in this program.